The problem is when you're working with observables for the first time, like we were, or when you're building your first Angular app, like we were, then the RxJS documentation is not beginner friendly. And yeah, I get it. There are other resources out there. I've searched for them. I've used them. The problem is what I really wanted was a resource that was designed to prioritize understanding over technical detail. I wanted something that was written targeting an audience that is starting from square one, and that is what I've tried to do in this video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what observables are. Of course, it's not enough to just know what they are. We want to be able to use them effectively, but I've decided to split this up into two videos. This video is about what they are, and that video is about how to use them. So first, a review of what you might already know. Let's talk about promises. I might assume you already know something about promises. Promises are one way of dealing with asynchronous functions in JavaScript, which means that they're a way of executing one function while another function runs without an interruption. The thing about promises, though, is that they begin and they end. They begin when they're constructed, and they end when they're either resolved or rejected. To better understand promises and how they are different from observables, I'm going to tell a little story. Well, it's actually three versions of the same story. Here's the first version of the story. You're sitting at home and you decide that it might be a great day to go to the beach if only the weather will cooperate. One way of deciding whether or not the weather is going to be good for you is to just look at the window. You can see that there are water droplets on the window. The window is wet, therefore it must be raining. You decide not to go to the beach today. That would be an example of something that is synchronous. You look for an answer, you get your answer, you make your decision. Done. Okay, that was quick. Here's the second version of the story. Another way you can make this decision is that you could ask somebody in the room with you to go ahead and check the forecast on their phone. This would be asynchronous because while the other person is checking the forecast on their phone, you're able to continue going about whatever you were doing until they come back to you with an answer. Asking the person would be like constructing the promise, and waiting for the response would be the resolve. This isn't the best version of the story though, because listen to what happens next. They say, hey, guess what? It rained this morning, but it's going to be sunny for the rest of the afternoon. Going to the beach is an excellent idea. All right, great. Let's get ready to go to the beach. So you start packing a picnic, and you're packing your swimsuit and sunscreen. You're getting all these things ready to load into the car. But meanwhile, unknown to you, storm clouds are coming in and it starts to pour down rain. The weather forecast was wrong, and you put all that effort into getting ready for nothing. No beach day today. Scenario 3. Instead of asking anybody, you decide to turn on the radio, and you tune it into a very specific channel that only does the weather 24/7. So you turn on the radio station and they say, it's a great day to go to the beach today, folks. It looks like it's going to be sunny all day. You start to pack your picnic, but you keep the radio station on. As you're beginning to put the sandwiches together, the radio announcer says, hey folks, much to our surprise, it looks like it's going to rain after all. So if you're packing for a picnic, you better put those supplies away and make plans to stay in. This scenario is unlike a promise because instead of getting one single response, the response is ongoing. This response is most like a subscription to an observable. The observable is the weather, the subscription is the radio signal that keeps you up to date. As long as the radio is turned on, you are getting every available update. You're not missing a single bit of information until you either turn the radio off or the radio breaks. And we'll see this with subscriptions, as subscriptions will last until you unsubscribe. So those are the three versions of the story. The three methods for determining the weather were looking at the window, asking a friend to check the forecast, and tuning in the radio to the weather channel. Now we're going to use those metaphors to better understand the terminology in the actual documentation. For this part, you can actually follow along with the documentation. I'm in the observable section under pulling and pushing. In this example, the weather is our focus. The weather is what is creating the events that make the day happen. So the weather is the producer. Meanwhile, the person who wants to know what the weather is the consumer. So in the first example, when they check to see if the window is wet, the consumer is getting information from the producer synchronously. That's a pull because they're getting it from the producer. In the second example, I demonstrated what a promise is. This is a push because the consumer has to wait for the person who's checking the weather to finish their process, and then they send that information to the consumer. They're pushing it to them. But this push is happening with a single event, checking the forecast, then all is said and done. In the last example, we have another push protocol, but this time there are multiple events to push to the consumer. That's what it means when it says RxJS introduces observables, a new push system for JavaScript. An observable is a producer of multiple values, pushing them to observers, consumers. So that's the definition in the form of a story. We can actually apply this metaphor to other definitions as well. For example, the meaning of the word observer comes very naturally. According to RxJS, an observer is a consumer of values delivered by an observable. In other words, in the story, you are the observer. Like any observer, you have three functions. One is your next function. That's the function that tells you what to do with the incoming values that you're receiving from the weather. Error is whatever happens when the radio breaks, and complete is what happens when you have finally decided to turn off the radio and you've made up your mind. Either you go to the beach or you stay home. Subject is another word that we can easily fit into the metaphor. According to RxJS, a subject is a special type of observable that allows values to be multicasted to many observers. So the radio is like a subject because you can have one radio with multiple people listening to it. Contrastingly, if there were multiple people each listening to their own radio, this would not be a subject. Rather, this would be like a plain observable, since each subscriber owns an independent execution of the observable. When I was getting started, I was confused about the difference between subject and behavior subject, but now it makes a lot of sense. The documentation says a behavior subject stores the current value. In the metaphor, a subject is like the radio, while a behavior subject is like a weather app. Here's why. With a radio, because it's a live show, it's possible to tune in right after a weather announcement has been made. When that happens, you have to keep listening until another announcement gets made in order to find out what the latest news is. With a phone app, the latest report is always saved on the home screen. So as soon as you turn it on, it's possible to get the latest report, even if that report is 10 minutes old. Use a subject when you have multiple observers and you want updates as they come. Use a behavior subject when you have multiple observers and you want the latest update as soon as they subscribe. Lastly, let's look at some code. This sample comes right off of RxJS site. What I'm going to do is replace some of the values with values that make sense in the context of our story. So what does this say? First, it says that the weather is an observable. Now, of course, in real life, weather is something that happens outside of whether or not anyone is watching it, but because this is a constructed example, the first thing that happens inside of this observable is it prints out, I'm the weather, I'm being observed now. Then it sends the first value, which is rain, followed by sun, followed by rain again. Next, we're going to instantiate an instance of our observer. That's why we say weather.subscribe, and then the observer itself is the parameter passed into that function. Now this observer has three optional parameters: a next function, an error function, and a complete function. But in this example, only the next function is being described. And so you can see what happening is every time it receives a value, it's just printing the value. That's why when this code is executed, we get this printout. What I like about observables is that they represent reality. In reality, we operate based on a continuous stream of stimuli. Since we're beginning to see how observables represent changing stimuli, the next step is to talk about how to work with them. We're going to be talking about operating with observables, or using operators. That is the subject of the next video. I would encourage you to watch it now, but if you happen to be watching this video during the 1 week between when I publish videos, be sure to subscribe so you receive a notification as soon as it becomes available. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.